This week on Quadriga, Hooligans versus Salafists, battlefield Germany. Last Sunday, a demonstration in the German city of Cologne against Islamic extremism turned into a riot. About 4,000 neo-Nazis and members of the country's soccer hooligan scene took part. Police were attacked by rioters hurling bottles and fireworks. Dozens of police officers were wounded. This was the first time such a large number of right-wing extremists and soccer hooligans had banded together in Germany. The scale of the violence has shocked many. But was the Cologne riot a one-off event, or is Germany becoming a battleground for rival extremist groups? Your host this week, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. How grave is the danger of a new right-wing extremism in Germany? And how much potential for danger comes from homegrown terrorism here in Germany? That's what we want to talk about today with three people who've been following the story closely. It's a pleasure to welcome Ines Pohl. She's the editor-in-chief of the Berliner daily Tageszeitung, former political editor at regional newspapers in Hessen and in Lower Saxony. She also held a prestigious Nieman Fellowship at Harvard from 2004 to 2005. And nice to have Alan Posener back on the show. He contributes to a variety of media, among them the debate magazine, The European. He has worked as an editor and author for the German newspaper Die Welt, and he was also chief of opinion for the Welt am Sonntag. And finally, our third guest is Yasmina Al-Gannabi. She is a freelance journalist and documentary filmmaker who works primarily on topics involving the Arab world. She's half German, half Iraqi, and is currently participating in Deutsche Welle's international exchange program. Ines Pohl, how new and how qualitatively different is this alliance now between rowdy soccer fans and right-wing extremists? Haven't there, in fact, always been contacts between these groups in the past?
Well, hooligans per se are not really highly politically. Even so, they have some, nationalistic and racist parts in their ideology, but they're more, they like to be violent. That's their main issue. It's not so much about their political ideology. So this connection is new. Even so, I have to say, to talk about the German battlefield, I think this is a little bit too much. Yes, indeed, it was 4,500, 5,000 right-wingers on the streets, the biggest amount since 1945. That has to frighten us. But on the other hand, I also would really ask everyone to look precisely what exactly happened there, and not overestimate and say Germany is a big battlefield.
Alan Posener, would you see it the same way? Just a few weeks ago, a so-called meetup between these same two groups, between some soccer fans and some right-wing extremists, only drew a couple of hundred people. Now, as Ines Pohl just told us, 4,500. What accounts for the sudden escalation in those numbers and for the politicization of these apparently earlier unpolitical hooligans?
Yeah, well, I agree that it's a sort of male thing. There's a lot of free-floating male testosterone-inspired violence out there, but it does make you scared when this suddenly finds a channel against a certain group. They say they're against Salafists, by which they mean basically anyone who's Muslim. That's the first thing. And secondly, 4,500 people beat up 49 policemen. So they're not actually beating up Salafists. They're attacking the government of the country. Now, of course, this isn't, as everyone says, Berlin isn't Weimar. We're not back to where we were 80 years ago, but, if we always say, be careful of the beginnings and stop the beginnings. So I definitely think this is a big alarm sign when, as I said, this sort of free-floating male violence gets channeled into a political, into a certain political direction.
Yasmina Al-Gannabi, Germany, in fact, has had a smaller right-wing movement in the last few years, smaller at least than many other European countries that were perhaps harder hit by the economic crisis. Do you think we're seeing that change now?
We're seeing now that change, but first of all, if you would pardon me, then I would go back to your points that you mentioned before. I agree on a few points that you mentioned, but I don't agree fully on them. We have this movement now since a few years, and they're becoming more and more. And this connection between the hooligans and between the right extremists, are not new. These connections are now since a few years. They organize themselves already like 1.5 years ago, and now they decided to take it further and to take it on the streets and to protest and whatever. And not all who participated there on this movement there in Cologne are male. There are a lot of families who participated as well. There were a lot of women with children who kind of consider themselves normal Germans, but they have other thoughts and other ideologies. And there was also a movement from a few Kurdish parties who participated in that movement as well. So there were not only German right extremists there. And only a few media mentioned that. And for example, I saw a video also on Vice News where they had some interviews with people from that Kurdish movement who said, yes, we're against the Islamic State in Levant, and this is why we're participating in this movement without really realizing what's going on. Okay, Germany is not a battlefield, but it's getting harder and harsher year after year for Muslims here in Germany, especially because of the Sharia police who started their movement there in Wuppertal a few months ago.
So is the new element here then, Ines Pohl, the fact that there's a very fertile ground for exploiting anti-Islamic sentiment in the broader population?
I absolutely agree. And this has a lot to do with what we are seeing in Syria. So, like, it's much easier to find people who are against Salafists. This is most definitely true. But you know what, we mustn't...
Would like to remind us of what Salafists are. I'm not sure the term is equally known by all of our international viewers. Do you want to give us a quick...
I think this is probably, you are probably the expert in doing a definition on Salafists.
Okay.
We'll go right back to you, Ines, but do remind us what we're talking about here. A very fundamentalist form of Islam, is that right?
Very fundamentalist form of Islam. Their movement is becoming bigger and bigger for the moment. As far as I know, Bundesverfassungsschutz is now...
Your Domestic Intelligence Service?
Is mentioning that there are about 6,400 here moving in Germany, officially members of this movement, but they're becoming more and more, and they're having a lot of fundamental ideas, and they're also ready to take part of the fights against the infidel in the Middle East. Okay. They're also here presenting themselves on the streets in Germany, spreading books, Korans, and trying to talk to people to kind of perform their idea.
Okay, I want to come back in a moment now to what we make of that movement itself. But now, Ines Pohl,
I want to make one point. I think this is very important to have in mind. Now with Facebook and all other social media, it's so much easier for these different groups to join together for one event. And the police totally underestimated the amount of people who would come to Cologne last weekend, and therefore it was only 1,500 policemen and 4,500 demonstrators. Therefore, the violence could be so, so crucial and so massive because the police couldn't dam it. So, but I think we have to keep in mind that we are Facebook, we are these closed groups. It's so easy to bring hundreds and thousands of people together, which do not really agree in so many things, but they have one thing in common: they are against Salafists. And this is new.
One of the things that fascinated me, Alan Posener, when I was reading up on this was the fact that actually neither the soccer rowdies nor the right-wing extremists have had a very good image of late. And it looked like in many ways both of them were hoping to instrumentalize this broader anti-Islamic sentiment in the population to sort of do some image polishing.
Yeah, right. And the disturbing thing is that I think they're succeeding in certain ways. I mean, the problem is never really a couple of thousand people on the streets, doing stupid things. The point is when they get taken seriously by the center or parts of the center or parts of the elite. And we have had people, for instance, from mainstream elected parties, like the so-called Alternative for Germany, sympathizing with this movement. And you get a lot of people sort of at dinner parties sort of say, well, as long as they beat up the Salafists, let them go to it. This sort of idea that you can use people you wouldn't normally associate with to beat up other people you wouldn't associate with. This has a long tradition and a very bad tradition in German history. And this is I think, what makes the whole thing dangerous. German society definitely needs to see that you can't sort of use hooligans, Nazis, rowdies, whatever, to beat up Salafists or Kurdish people to beat, to do your dirty work for you. You have to defend your democracy and your civil society yourself.
I agree with that, and you have to defend it. Even so, you might as well criticize, as we hopefully do, the Salafists and other extremists. I agree with that, but I wouldn't say that the alternative of Germany, this new party, this really nationalist party, would ever agree with what the hooligans did on the streets. We have to be careful with that. I haven't talked to anybody in the political field who really agrees with this violence on the street against extremists or extreme Islamists. So I think we should be, we should be careful not to make it too big.
But Yasmina Al-Gannabi, I wonder how much support there would be, perhaps not within the political world, but in the broader population as a whole. How strong is the rise in skepticism or fear of Islamic fundamentalism within the population as a whole?
Well, actually, from the parties, nobody really supported the movement, so from politics. I read a few articles about a few ministers from North Rhine-Westphalia and other ministers here in Germany who condemn that movement. But at the same time, they're not really offering really steps against what's going on. And they're saying, oh, we're having the problem under control, and this is what happened, but we will see, probably we will provide more support for police.
I want to come back to that later and to the politicians, but what about the broad population? Germans, just your man on the street, as we like to say.
The fear is really getting bigger. The fear is really getting bigger after what happened in Wuppertal, where the Salafist police started to move on and then to talk to people who are drinking alcohol or to talk to couples who are kissing each other. I mean, why do you show that presence by wearing a jacket written on it, Sharia police? So this is like a provocation for the Germans. This is the reason why, on the one hand, okay, it's not good what's happening, but on the other hand, it was meant to be.
Many people in Germany first became aware of the Salafist movement about 2 years ago when Salafists were distributing Qurans on the streets, something Yasmina Al-Gannabi mentioned earlier. And now there is rising attention to this movement. Let's take a brief look at what the Salafists stand for.
Members of ultra-conservative Muslim groups are actively seeking new recruits in Germany. The security authorities estimate there are about 6,000 in the country. There are concerns that many of these people could join Islamists fighting in Syria and Iraq. And there's also the risk they will return to Germany to carry out terrorist attacks. Meanwhile, the rise of the terror group Islamic State has fueled anti-Salafist feeling. There have been clashes between Kurdish supporter groups and Islamists in several German cities. There is fear of a further radicalization of these groups. How should the government react?
Posener, how big is the threat from Islamic fundamentalism here in Germany? The key thing most people are worried about, of course, after Canada is homegrown terrorism. Is it a possibility?
Well, it's always a possibility, isn't it? And you can't stop it. You know, if someone gets in his car, like happened as it happened in Canada, and drives into a, hits a soldier with his car, what can you do about it? Same thing, by the way, happened in Jerusalem. An Arab terrorist drove his car into a crowded bus station, killed a 3-year-old baby. Wasn't much on the news here because it was a Jewish baby. But anyway, so yes, there is a danger of homegrown terrorism. But on the other hand, what happens is that under the general heading of Salafism, a sort of back to the roots movement with Islam and terrorism are put in the same box, and that's wrong. What's wrong with giving out the Quran on the streets? That's, I mean, you can, if it was Bibles, there's always these people, Seventh-day Adventists standing with, giving out Bibles and religious tracts. That's perfectly okay. On the other hand, if someone decides to do terrorism, that's not okay. That's what we have a security force for. So I think we need to definitely put a division between people who say we shouldn't drink alcohol, even the Salafist police. I mean, that's really just a joke. If you have billboards advertising alcohol, you can surely have people saying don't drink alcohol. Come on. And that you have to divide that from terrorism, and that's exactly what the hooligans, rowdies, and a lot of the population actually don't do. They're generally against any kind of Islamic propaganda.
Ines Pohl, one sees widely varying estimates about the number of German citizens, perhaps many of them Salafists, who have gone off to Iraq and Syria to fight and might eventually come back here. Do you have any sense of what the accurate number might be?
It's no one really knows, but it's obviously much more than one thought a couple of years ago, and it's raising, it's growing. It might be a couple of hundreds, it might be even more. What I think we have to do is to ask, why do these people join this group? You know, they can drink alcohol or not drink alcohol, read the Bible or the Quran or whatsoever. I don't really care as a Democrat. But the question must be the same with the hooligans. Why do people join these groups? And aren't these people, very often pretty young people, so-called losers? They don't find any other meaning in life, and they give them a meaning. They make them worthy something. They feel, you know, I'm worth something. I'm important. And this is a question Germany has to deal with. And this is a really threat to our country.
Yasmina Al-Gannabi, what's your sense of the risk of real, true, homegrown terrorism? And would you agree with Alan that there are two very different things at work here? On the one hand, people distributing Qurans, why not? Or is there a link between the two?
Well, for sure, there is no problem with distributing books, no matter what kind of books these are, because people are free to read in a democracy what they want to read. But at the same time, acting as a police and calling yourself Sharia police gives a total other meaning to the thing what's going on. Pierre Vogel, the German leader of the Salafists here in Germany, who was a German who converted to Islam, and there are a lot of German leaders there as well, kind of said, yeah, this was a marketing strategy to kind of waking up the people and telling them we're here. We would like to have more people to join our group and so on. At the same time, there are a few politicians who are mentioning that those people who are joining those groups are losers, are Muslims, probably with migrational background, but they're totally forgetting about the Germans who are converting to Islam. Pierre Vogel is not Arab. Pierre Vogel is not Turkish. Pierre Vogel is German. His name is already German. So like waking up and seeing what makes those young people, even the Germans, who are coming from a German background, who have probably grown up in a normal family, what makes them join such a group? Or what makes a young girl with 16, 17 years think of going to jihad and getting married to someone whom she met through Facebook, going to a country which she never visited before, just to see what's going on? This is a main point. Like going to those young people, speaking with them, what are their problems? Okay, if you're a loser, you have migrational background, probably you might have a problem with language, or you might have a problem with getting a chance to integrate yourself here in society. But what makes Germans commit to this kind of ideology?
So, Alan Posener, how do we stop the potentially dangerous form of fundamentalism from spreading? How do we prevent those disaffected young people from being radicalized and potentially turned into violent, homegrown, or foreign terrorists?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to dissociate ourselves from the idea that they're actually losers. I don't think so. I think many of them are quite intelligent people who just don't get the chance in society to fulfill their higher aspirations, you know, because there's a sort of social democratic German idea: give him a nice job, give him a house, give him a wife and kids, and he'll be okay, or she, with you know. But that's not the point. These are people who really want something. They're idealists in their own twisted way. I know this because I used to be a Marxist-Leninist myself, and I wasn't a loser. I was someone who wanted to change society. So I think you have to address people over their heads, not just over their, sort of view them as people who society can somehow sedate. And you have to give them the idea that they can actually do something in society. That's what democracy is for, to somehow fulfill their idea of their own self-worth. And that's more than just giving them a job and what. Maybe you meant the same thing.
I agree with you, you know, but then in your case it might be interesting to ask, why were you so misled? You know, what you wanted to do something that's great, that's in great impulse if a young person wants to get politically involved. But why those people, you know, who offer beheadings of other people, who offer to be part of a killing team? That's something different than, like, you know, throwing maybe stones against some figures of capitalism or so. What makes them, you know, want to be part of this absolutely brutal and crucial regime? This is more than just finding a destiny in life, isn't it? There must be some poison in this way they recruit these young kids, which is obviously very hard to handle.
Yasmina Al-Gannabi, that particular issue always makes me wonder, because there's a big discussion right now in Germany, and I would like to come to it in just a minute, about whether one should stop such young people from even traveling to Syria and Iraq. Take away their passports, don't let them go. But were they to go and experience the poison, mightn't they be somehow converted back to a more moderate course? Isn't it possible that actually seeing these terrors happening could dissociate them from them?
Well, first of all, taking the passports won't be a solution, in my point of view. They would find another way to go there. So if you take away a passport, okay, so what? I'll take another and then go illegally. This is the first thing. The second thing is that what about those people who are really coming back? Probably they might be traumatized, they might need some treatment. Can they integrate themselves again here in the society? Even if they're disappointed from what they saw there in Syria and in Iraq, would they really try to have a better life? Even if they try, would they be able to? I mean, if you really saw the fighting going over there, and it's not normal fighting, they're cutting off heads of people and they're violating women, they're violating children. It's a total, completely other idea of violence from what we have seen before in other wars. So what about those people? So the German government, in my point of view, would first need to, those who came back, giving them the treatment they might need to integrate themselves again, because otherwise they will be like ticking bombs who might explode in any other occasion.
In Denmark, there is a project like that. So they really offer
for returnees.
For returnees, and they really work with them. It's like really post-traumatic stress syndrome therapy they get. And I think this is one way to handle this particular group, those who are coming back and those who are willing to talk about that. I totally agree. This is really a ticking bomb.
And they're really talking even to the families. They're integrating the families in that process as well. So you can't leave out the families, because what made a girl going there, or what made a young man going there? So there might be also a problem in the family itself. So yeah.
So Alan Posener, linking this back to the fear of Islamic fundamentalism, clearly that fear is partly based on a lack of confidence in the moment in the approaches of government and of the federal states toward keeping a lid on the risk. What would an effective prevention strategy look like, both in terms of keeping people from going to Iraq and Syria, or stopping them from returning as potential human bombs, and or keeping young people on the right track at home?
Oh, well, I mean, you know, if that's the, you know, $1,000 question. If I knew the answer, you know, I'd probably be working for the Ministry of the Interior. But, you know, there are some things...
Journalists love to give a shot at $1 million questions, so...
Well, one thing is obvious. We don't, as Germany, we don't have enough human intelligence within these groups. We don't have enough... I mean, we virtually control the neo-Nazi NPD, right? I mean, for a time we did, or until they sort of...
Obviously not anymore when we look at Cologne, I mean...
we have lots of people working in there. We don't have that many people working within in the forefront of, you know, of where these Salafists do their recruiting. And other, you know, not Salafists. I mean, there are also, let's face it, Turkish extremists and so on, also recruiting people from within the Kurdish community and so on and so on. So we don't know enough. We only notice it when the people go and suddenly their parents ring up, where's my daughter, where's my son? So we have to do a lot more there. We have to realize that, as President Wolf said, Islam belongs to Germany. Therefore, they also belong sort of to the circle of, you know, we have to recruit people from that community who are going to go in there and help the German state. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I really think we need to make people, give young Turks, young Arabs, young Iranians a real shot at doing things in the community and becoming people, and not, as they are still today, second-class citizens in many cases. And you know, will that stop people going off to be terrorists or committing terrorist acts? No, because we know this from our own history. Violence has an incredible attraction. Look at the way that people went to the First World War singing. This was just 100 years ago. Look at the attraction of the Nazi SA hordes for academics, students. They were the people who burned the books. Yet this is not going to go away. This is something you have to deal with all the time. It's the Salafists today, it's the hooligans tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, it's going to be something different. But, you know, that's more a philosophical question.
Ines Pohl, the state, the federal state where these hooligan demonstrations occurred last weekend has said it now wants to strengthen prevention efforts. But if you look at empirical studies about the effectiveness of attempts at prevention, you have to conclude the results are often quite mixed. Why is that?
Well, I think the very point is we have to take them serious, and we have to take their problem serious, and we have to get closer to these groups. I totally agree. We have to watch them, and we have to understand why they are willing, you know, to demonstrate against whomsoever. So the problem just on the other hand is to try to handle that by sharpening the laws, by taking away passports. This is, on the surface, the state then shows, yes, we're taking action and they might feel stronger, but does it really, by the very end of the day, help? I don't know. I think only a very little bit. We have to come close to these people and take their problem serious, and we have to offer them perspectives in these countries. Also the hooligans who are 25 years old, or the wives of the hooligans, very many of them are jobless. Yes, there might be some intelligence people there, but there might be even intelligence if they're losers. That's what I wanted to say earlier on. But they are really outlaws in that case, that they don't have very good jobs. They're very often jobless. They just do not have the feeling they're part of this community, and you know, they're worth something. This is, again, the main point.
Yasmina Al-Gannabi, Alan Posener told us a moment ago, we seem to know a lot more about the right-wing groups than we do about Islamic fundamentalist groups. But in fact, for quite a while, the state clearly didn't know enough about right-wing groups. I'm referring, of course, to the murders that were committed with impunity over 10 years, murders against members of the immigrant community, people with migrant background here in Germany, by a right-wing group called the NSU. State turned a blind eye, did not do enough to investigate it. And people here in Germany often say that many authorities seem to be blind on the right eye in terms of right-wing violence. Would you say that is still true?
It is still true. I mean, even the burning of that papers which belong to the case that. Okay, so not burning, but like
they got lost. Some files got lost.
So how can in Germany we're not like talking about any state there without law, without democracy, such important papers get lost. On the same time, they're more concentrating on the violence committed by Muslims or Salafists or other organizations, rather than violence committed by the right wing, what they're doing. I mean, as you said before, it's nothing new. There are even like professors in some cities in Germany who don't seem typical German, coming from India, from Africa, who get attacked by young men who belong to that right wing.
Have you yourself experienced xenophobia? Anti-Middle Eastern. I know you're not yourself a Muslim, but have you had direct experience yourself, given your name? And
it's not that I've luckily never been attacked on the street, but I keep on hearing comments, or sometimes I had the experience a few years ago during a job interview where they told me seriously in my face that they only invited me to see how good my German was and to see what kind of performance I would do, because they never had the experience with a journalist having like a bilingual background. So this is the reason why they wanted to meet me, but they would never give me the job.
Alan Posener, do you agree with Yasmina Al-Gannabi that there still is a systematic tendency to underestimate danger from the right?
Yes, point taken, and I was wrong actually to say we know what's going on. The question is actually, was there a collusion? I mean, it's even worse than not knowing. Was there a collusion between certain state authorities and people in NSU or in the NPD or other right-wing fascist Nazi groups. And that is something that is really, really horrible.
Just a reminder for our viewers, NSU, of course, was that group of people who committed the murders I spoke of, and NPD is the National Party of Democracy.
Right, and they have contacts to our internal secret services. We have one in each of the federal states, plus one federal, and there seems to have been collusion, and that is really horrible for anyone who's interested in democracy. So we were actually too close there, and I agree.
Has it changed?
Well, I think they're doing things. You know, I think there's been NSU has been a wake-up call. I think at least at the top of the security forces that people have been sacked and so on. I think it's going to change. But I agree totally that anyone who has a non-white skin or who has the wrong kind of name will experience stuff like Yasmina said on a daily basis, and it's even small things like I myself, someone writes me a mail and I write back lieber so-and-so, dear so-and-so, with a calling her by a male name because I don't know that in Iranian or Turkish or whatever, actually it's a she, that name. So, you know, it's small things. It's small things, but we say, I mean, we like to say we've accepted that Islam and immigrants belong to Germany, but, you know, in the small things, even people like us, you know, can hurt people.
I think it has changed. The awareness is growing bigger, also in politics. And the fact that there are more young politicians with a migrant background are joining the parties. You know, Steinmeier, our foreign minister, has one of his really close co-workers. She's a Muslim. So this helps a lot if they have people, you know, working with them and politicians themselves. The awareness is getting bigger. There's still a lot to do, sure, no question. But I have the feeling, and I'm watching that very closely and very critical as running my paper who has a leftist tradition. So, but I really would say in this point we can say the awareness is growing. It's still a lot of things to do. It's not that I want to see everything is fine
now,
yet.
because we don't have so much more time left, and I'd like to turn to the question of what then the authorities, both at the political level and administrative level in the federal states, need to be doing about this alliance between right-wing extremists and rowdy football fans going forward, because they're telling us they do plan to demonstrate again, possibly here in Berlin. Yasmina Al-Gannabi, should those demonstrations be banned? Are these simply people out looking for a fight who should not be permitted to take advantage of the public streets to do so?
It's a very difficult question to answer, because on the one hand, if you say, no, you're not allowed to do your protest, so they would say, okay, so the German government is really invaded by the Islamists, so we really have to do something about the government. But what I think is, just let them go on the street, do whatever they want to do. If they want to beat themselves up between each other, let them. But then the police has to be ready. The situation has not to be underestimated. They have to be ready when those people go on the street.
But
maybe
the violence. They did send 1,300 policemen onto the street of Cologne. That's quite a number. Are they really so unprepared?
They were unprepared. I mean, 50 policemen got beaten up. It's not like a small number, 50 policemen. And they were not ready. They were expecting 500, and in the end, they showed up with 5,000.
Well, that puzzles me very, very much, Alan Posener, because in fact, 7,000 people had registered, and the authorities knew that.
Well, don't ask me. I wasn't there. I mean, I wasn't responsible. I don't understand it. Especially, it's a red-green, it's a left-wing government in North Rhine-Westphalia, which should be more, you know, have its antenna up more when that kind of thing happens. This was disgraceful.
They need more resources.
Well, obviously the police need more resources. I mean,
do they? Really?
Yes.
They just, you know, they weren't aware of it. They don't follow like the new media. They didn't, and we had some interviews with policemen. They did not have any clue that there were like all these, you know, closed groups on Facebook where people met. And there were leftist organizations who warned them and said, listen, people, this is going to be bigger than you think. But they just ignored it. So they are very poorly educated when it comes to the internet and to new ways of communication.
So do they need more resources in the sense of more armored vehicles, more guns, more whatever? whatever, or do they need more intelligence?
More awareness, really. This is the first thing, you know, and they need to be better educated and to have a better awareness what might happen with these new coalitions, you know, which really can be built up so easily now, within a couple of hours, actually. And then they say, okay, we're going to demonstrate in Hamburg, and this is only 1.5 or 2 hours away from Berlin. So, you know, when they see, okay, the police is getting ready in Hamburg to fight us, so they move immediately to Berlin. They are so fast now, so mobile. So this is a big problem.
The demonstrations on the 15th of November planned for Hamburg.
I actually disagree with you. I think demonstrations here, when you know they're going to be violence, they should be forbidden.
Huh.
It's a big, especially in this country, it's so important that we have the freedom of speech and the right to demonstrate. But when you know that there will be thousands of people who will be violent, and they know that, they proclamate that, then I think that it's the right it's actually the duty of the states to forbid demonstrations like that, especially on a day like the 9th of November, when Berlin will be packed with hundreds of thousands of tourists.
Alan Posener, would you agree with that? Certainly there's an Anglo-Saxon view that says the clash of different points of view is the best way to discredit a bad one.
Yeah, I would say forbidding things isn't going to help, even on the 9th of November, even in Berlin. You know, I mean, for you know this, for years and years and years in Berlin, we had demonstrations on the 1st of May, which always turned violent. But, you know, the Berlin Senate didn't forbid these demonstrations. Let it happen. Let citizens mobilize against it. And now the 1st of May is a great celebration, a peaceful celebration in Kreuzberg. So I'm not saying that's going to happen with the hooligans. It's different.
I would just wonder, you know, I think you have to explain what the background of the first this demonstration.
But, you know, I mean, the point is, at the time when the 1st of May was always a riot. I know in our paper everyone was saying, forbid it, forbid it, forbid it. So, no, you have to combat it with political means. One of the means, by the way, is more policemen and women, and more policemen and women from Muslim backgrounds, for instance. All that kind of thing has to be done. We're slashing the budget of the police. And then we expect these people to go out, hold their heads, you know, I mean, out and get bashed up by, you know, beaten up by hooligans or whoever.
Yeah, I agree in that point, but do you really think if you would have more Muslim women on the police side that this would help to keep the hooligans away from really doing harm to people on the streets? Do you really think you can control that? Then you would need to send in the army to control like 10 or 15,000 of hooligans who are expected.
Yasmina Al-Gannabi, the German Constitution is a very interesting document because it enshrines two very, very important principles, but sometimes they're in conflict with one another, as they appear to be here. One is the inviolability of human dignity. That, of course, was an outgrowth of the Holocaust, of the Second World War, saying this must not be touched. And that is perhaps the key clause of the German Constitution. But free speech, freedom of opinion, that is also very, very high on the list. How do they get balanced here?
This is the problem. This is why I said let them protest, let them go on the street. Just be ready for them, because we live in a democracy. You have to hear the opinion and the other opinion. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be in one opinion since you're living in one country. But let every party get their chance to talk, to express themselves, to speak out. But find a point where you can also communicate with each other. Violence is never going to be the solution. Preventing people from going to the street is never going to be the solution. Taking the passports is never going to prevent people from going to Syria, to Iraq, to fight or whatsoever. So just to find a solution, talking to those young people to see what they really need, to see what the problem, because it seems that the German government totally forgot about young people.
Alan Posener, both Ines Pohl and Yasmina Al-Gannabi told us at the outset of the program that, in a way, Germany is importing the tensions of the Middle East. And of course, we're seeing that happening everywhere now. The whole phenomenon of homegrown terrorism is essentially just that. Are we then looking at potentially quite a long-term problem here? Because we're told that the conflicts in Syria and Iraq could go on for years.
Oh, they definitely will. This is... well, there's lots of things happening. I can't analyze the Middle East, you know, in one sentence, but take simply the war between Sunni and Shiites. And this is a war which has been going on for centuries, and it's going to has now turned violent in certain parts of the world, and it's not going to go away, and it's going to, it's going to create terrorists, it's going to create stuff like the Islamic State, and that's going to be imported to us. We have to learn to deal with it. It's not going to, it's not a danger to German democracy, it's a danger to certain German people who are going to be victims of attacks, and they have to be protected. That's why we need the police force to be strong and the security apparatus to be strong. That's not a right-wing concern, that's a left-wing concern. It's protecting citizens. But we have also to be very careful not to get hysterical.
Do you think, Ines Pohl, certainly in the past, there have been tendencies on the part of many Germans to think, well, we just need to stay out of things and then we're going to be fine. One heard that quite a bit after the 11th of September 2001, the sense that this is sort of, this is the kind of thing that happens to the US because it goes out and acts as world policeman, but we're not going to do that, and therefore, do you think that sense is changing? Do Germans feel more vulnerable, and is that part of what we're seeing here?
Absolutely, it is changing for many reasons, because we are really getting more vulnerable, and something will happen sooner or later. In Germany, in Europe, in London, in other countries, I think this is clear. We can't be, mainly because many people, some of these jihadists have no German passports. How can you prevent them to coming back to their home country? And then the other thing is, which is really changing in this country, is the discourse, do we have to get involved or not? When you listen carefully to our defense minister, to our president, they are really mirroring, I think, the changing of the discourse in the German society. People do understand that we, being so strong, so rich, the richest European country, we have to take part in the defense of our democracy and in the defense of, in a military way, of our democracy. So there's a shift.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us today. And I look forward very much to continuing the discussion in the future, given that it most likely is a challenge that's going to be with us for a while. Thanks to all of you for being with us today. Stay tuned and see you soon.